war, famine, and pestilence. Magna Carta Part 1 coming right up. Last time we talked about how King John of England was forced to sign the Magna Carta in 1215, which established the principle that even the king was subject to the law. But John's successor, Henry III, was having none of that. Henry hated this. He spent the next 20 years trying to find ways around the provisions of the Carta and making alliances, and then he returned to England in 1265 to take back control of his kingdom. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, Historical Room Unfolded. Today we're talking about King Henry III's battle for control in 13th century England, and before we start I hope you'll already click like this video and subscribe my channel. Okay, let's dive into the video. King Henry has needed the support of the commoners too, and ideally he needed to find a way to co-opt the power of the barons without giving them too much leverage over him. So he began holding these massive council meetings that included representatives from all three of the English social classes, clergy, nobility, and commoners. The number of attendees ballooned to include hundreds of people, but the people weren't so sure. They started to demand a say in how they were governed. You can learn more about that through additional resources. The early parliaments didn't look anything like our modern parliament with its tidy little legislative buildings and rules and procedures. It was really more like a giant medieval mob that showed up to give the king advice, remind him of his legal obligations, and above all else, to complain. The complaints were usually about the collection of certain unpopular taxes, but sometimes they had broader implications. For example, in 1267, Simon de Montfort called for a reform of the English justice system. The king ignored him, but de Montfort took his complaints to the people and sparked a rebellion. The barons who had rebelled against him fled the country, and Henry spent the rest of his reign undoing the reforms that they had put in place. But in the process, he created the conditions for the future rise of Parliament. In 1259, he tried to force the barons to accept a new set of laws that were less favorable to them, but they rebelled against him and forced him to flee to Normandy in disguise. But he also passed some of their reforms, including the establishment of a committee to oversee the collection of royal revenues. This was the beginning of the end for royal absolutism in England. The people had a voice in their governance now, at least in theory, but it would take another 400 years for that voice to become fully realized. This was not good. Henry had staked his entire reign on his authority to raise taxes without the consent of the barons, and now they were openly defying him. He spent his first 16 years on the throne trying to get everyone to forget about that whole Magna Carta thing. His efforts were only partially successful, and while he did establish the groundwork for what would become the English Parliament, it didn't look at all like our modern conception of a representative democracy. Instead, it was more like an advisory council of the realm, whose primary purpose was to tell the king how he was doing, and to remind him that technically he was supposed to be following the law. You see, when Henry took the throne in 1216, he was only 9 years old. Regency councils ran the country until he came of age, and those councils were stacked with his mother's favorites, not exactly a model of impartiality. When Henry finally took control of his own court in 1227, he decided that he wanted to make up for lost time and get everything that he wanted, starting with total and complete control over England. He went back on the word of the previous regime and raised taxes to pay for a lavish new court and to finance a war with France. He pissed off the English barons by appointing foreigners to positions of power, and he pissed off the church by seizing church property and generally being an anti-clerical jerk. And then he pissed off the English citizens by raising their taxes too. So in 1248, 25 barons got together and forced Henry to sign a document called the Carta Subs, which established a council to oversee his administration and ensure that he followed the law, specifically the Magna Carta. But Henry was nothing if not tenacious. He spent 3 years in Normandy regrouping, raising money. See, Henry realized that he couldn't just rule through the aristocracy alone. When Henry finally crushed the rebellion, he made sure to punish the rich. Henry III died in 1272. To learn how his successors wrestled with the concept of divine right versus the will of the people. Stay tuned for more information. As you may have noticed, every single medieval monarch thought that he was the chosen one, destined by God to rule with absolute authority. And as always, I hope you learned something new today, and don't forget to leave a like, share and subscribe for more videos.